and growth dividends of its growing workforce, its government will need to ensure that people have the right knowledge, skills, and opportunities. In this 21st century, Africa will be the youngest region in the world and will be the source of the vast majority of global labor force growth. There is no doubt that the AFCFTA will gradually build progress towards delivering on the African Union's Agenda 2063. It is an investment. It will promote economic diversification, create jobs for its youth in both the short and medium term, and deliver on the SDG target, hopefully by 2030, and ensure the prosperity of the continent. With a combined GDP of over 2.3 trillion US dollars and a population of 1.2 billion, of which most are below the age of 30, African countries tend to gain substantially from intra-regional trade. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is with my utmost pleasure to officially welcome you to this first ever State of Africa 2020 virtual conference, and I trust that you will have a worthwhile experience as we engage in the excellent lineup of conversation ahead of us. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for those kind of opening remarks. I would like now to hand over to the moderator, Dr. Dennis Matanda. But before I do that, once again, I just want to remind the attendees that we have a Q&A session. Can they keep sending in questions? We'll be directing those to the moderators. And voila, enjoy the session. Dennis Matanda, there you go.
Thank you so much, Maggie. It is very exciting to be here. And for people who do not know Dr. Gurib Fakim, she wants to be called Amina. So let me just call her Your Excellency Amina. It is very exciting to be on a panel with the person who wrote Africa's first, let me put it in a very, what's a technical word? Like encyclopedia, but an encyclopedia on pharmaceuticals in Africa. During a time of COVID, for somebody to actually be in this position, at the same time as being in the position of one of Africa's only female presidents, for me is such a heartwarming experience. And Dr. Amina, you're very welcome, and it's such a pleasure to meet you once again. We met 2 days ago, and it is such a pleasure. Let me just move on to the very next person. And I want to encourage people to please go online, Google these people that I'm introducing, and just learn about them and actually be very impressed. The next person that I'm going to introduce is Dr. Carlos Lopez. Dr. Carlos Lopez is quite central to this conversation right now because he is not only in charge of a particular, how shall I put it? He's in charge of a particular relationship between the continent and partners. He's in charge of the relationship between the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and people like the United States, the European Union, China, and things like that. And his voice under the circumstances is going to be quite important. I want to then introduce three people, starting with a very important person. Dr. Edem, you and I have never met before, but I've been told that right now you should be in the theater operating somebody and that you're extremely busy with this sort of thing. So it is such a pleasure to have you on board. And I think that I want to see if I can pronounce your name properly. It's Odzogenu, or is that Odzogenu? Can I just confirm that before I make a mess of your name? Dr. Edem, how do you say it?
Odzogenu, you got it right.
Okay. Then it also gives me great pleasure to introduce somebody called Mohamed Jagana. Mohamed, I have actually worked in your country, and I think that some of the challenges that Gambia is facing, especially the Gambia Chamber of Commerce is facing in terms of the tariffs, the technical barriers to trade. In other words, because your country is almost 95% covered by Senegal, I mean, some of the business challenges that you're having are real. So it will be a very good way for us to converse in terms of the AFCFTA versus ECOWAS. So some of these conversations are quite alive and fitting. So just to start at this perspective, Your Excellency, Dr. Ramina, I just wanted to ask you a quick question to follow up on the conversation we had 2 days ago. If you are one of the most influential people in the world, according to the World Economic Forum, Bloomberg, and all that jazz. The question to ask you is, if you had all the power in the world, how would you like the AFCFTA to work for all countries, for all 55 countries, including Eritrea, which hasn't really signed on the AFCFTA agreement?
Thank you. This is a very tall order. In view of
Your Excellency, you're the one with the fancy degrees.
No, we would like to see more integration on the continent. And I think if you look by figures, we find that the European Union, in terms of trade, I think over 70%. Asia is around 60%. And Africa, I think we're less than 20%. So already it is pointing that there is a lot of potential for doing things amongst ourselves, and we already have a population of already 1.2 billion. Sorry, so there is already an internal African market. But I think, as you have rightly said, we have discussed this before, I just mentioned it again, we have several custom unions operating out on the continent. But I think ideally what we'd like to see is a continental custom union. And to be able to do that, there's so many things that we have to address. And one of the things that will override everything is how to address the issue of quality. Because whatever items we want to trade on, we would like to have quality, because if we are going to go for standardization, for example, the issue on which we will never be able to compromise will always be quality. So to drive this quality, we need to put in place the entire infrastructure of education, speed, efficiency in our systems. And also we have to introduce something which is much more overarching than all that we have discussed so far, is this acceptance of our Africanness. And this is something which has to be instilled in the young people, in all our folks, that we start to have to be very proud to be African, to consume African, to wear African, and to talk African. And this is something that we have to push along all the time, because this is something that has been denied to us for a long time. And this is something that we have to bring to the table again. How to accept, to consume African, to think African, to wear African. And even if you look at one sector, let's look at the textile sector. We've had this discussion before with Edem. We have seen that, the design of what we call African wax, for example, all the design and all the African material and all the rest of it, it's not owned by African. So in terms of intellectual property, how do we now work towards this framework, the legal framework, so that we start protecting our own, intangible resources that we have? There's so much richness around this continent. And again, we have taken one sector, the textile sector, but what about the food sector? What about the agriculture sector? All these have to be underpinned with very strong legal framework that ensure that the intellectual property rests with where it should be. So all this is work. It should be work in progress. I think work is already in progress, and there's a lot to do. So I think by signing on, I think the big economies on the continent, I think most of them have ratified the agreement. So we'll have to get the 54 countries on board so that we really start working and creating this market, which is a huge internal market of 1.2 billion, of course, set to grow. And by 2050, the advantage we will have is the youngest population. And this is, again, where our opportunities and the challenges lie. Opportunities is that we have a young population, yes, dynamic, and they can do things. But challenges that if we don't take care of this resource, it can become, it can work the other way. So this is not something that we want. And so we have to keep them engaged, and we have to keep training them. We have to keep on putting resources in their hands. And I think if we manage to do this, then of course this is 80% of the job done. Thank you.
Your Excellency, I really appreciate something that you said. And one of the things that I appreciate about what you said is you're almost taking us to the essence of quality. You're also taking us to the essence of the continental strengths, like the demographic dividend, the fact that we have a large number of people. But Dr. Lopez, if I may please come to you in this regard. Dr. Lopez, there is something about our reputation around the world. People are very worried that now with COVID delaying the further process of negotiation, we have so much to worry about as a continent. I wanted to find out where you see the essence of the negotiations with the AFCFTA, and how much hope you have for us to actually do AFCFTA trade by June 2021.
Well, thank you very much for that kind intervention. It's like you, I'm very honored to be in the same panel as Amina. I actually think it's very important for us to realize regional integration is not just trade. It's actually 5 dimensions that have been integrated in this regional index. Trade is one, of course, but productive integration is also very important. It's about producing goods and services. Because a lot of people will say, you are trading what? What do you produce that your neighbor requires? So that is part of making sure that we have global value chains present in the continent, and we constitute our own regional value chains. It's about macroeconomic integration, and it's also about infrastructure integration. And finally, it's about free movement of people. So you have all these dimensions. And when you take into account where are we progressing in each one of these 5 dimensions, you'll realize that we have actually been not so bad on the macroeconomic side. There are lots of convergence policies that have been implemented. And we have performed, like Amina just said, not so badly in terms of growth of GDP. We have been making progress on infrastructure integration, but we have lagged behind in terms of trade, and we have lagged behind in terms of productive integration. So where comes this pessimism about Africa? Partly because we are disintegrated, even when we negotiate. Like for instance, right now I'm negotiating as much as possible positions for the African countries to push the envelope in their new agreements being established with Europe. And what do we find? We find that Europe always will remind us that we are recipients of generosity from Europe. So Africa is very much in demand right now in the world, but we should not forget that Europe is our #1 trading partner as a bloc. It's our #1 provider of aid, and it's our #1 in terms of investment stock. What will never be mentioned in the same sentences or in the same documents is that Africa is the 3rd largest trading partner of Europe. We are more important than Japan. We are more important than Australia or Canada. We are 3 times India. We are as big as all of Latin America and the Caribbean combined. So this is just one demonstration that if we have, like it is the case, 17 different arrangements with Europe on trade, instead of having one, which is the CFTA, obviously we are not going to count for much. It's very simple mathematics that the only way we are going to change the risk perception about Africa is when you actually have the aggregates for the entire continent. I will dare you to find in any of the international organizations statistics that are Africa-wide. There aren't. It's either Sub-Saharan Africa, it's North Africa, it's this, it's that, but you don't have it. You have to struggle to compose the African-wide statistics. When I was in charge of the Economic Commission for Africa, tried very hard and actually made a rule. It was a red line that we will never publish anything that is not Africa-wide. But this is more easily said than done. It was very difficult. And sometimes we had to find ourselves in saying, the Africa, this and that, except for North Africa. because you wouldn't find the statistics that will allow you to do that. So this is the reasons for that risk perception being so negative.
Dr. Lopez, on a personal note, I still owe you an apology from 5 years ago. I came late for a very important meeting. However, on a very positive note, the African, the ECA, the Economic Commission for Africa, still maintains your rule. We still use statistics that are functioned in Africa. And from that perspective, I just wanted to quickly slide over to Dr. Redem on the Afro Champions Initiative. The things that Dr. Lopez has been spoken about, the things that Dr. Amina have spoken about, the aspects of quality, the aspects of the risk perception. My question to you, from both a private sector perspective and from a person who is on the policy side of things, how are we dealing with the fact that Nigeria has yet to sign on to the AFCFTA? And related to that, how are we dealing with the fact that the private sector is not warm to this thing yet? And when I say thing, I mean the AFCFTA and, of course, boosting intra-African trade. Dr. Redem, we can't hear you.
Sorry, apologies.
You're going to have to say that again.
Okay, thanks, Dennis, for this opportunity. I was saying that it was also a privilege to be with Dr. Amina, Dr. Lopez, Mohammed again, and it's a privileged opportunity. Now, as far as the agreement, I must say that Nigeria has actually signed the agreement. They are just in the final stages of ratification, the final stages of the consultations that will lead to the ratification, and we are very confident that hopefully by the end of this year, they should have ratified. So that's encouraging. And I must say also that the political will behind the CFTA is very strong for the simple reasons that Dr. Lopez and Dr. Amina have also spoken about, which is that we lack the negotiating leverage and might, especially in this period or dispensation of time in the world where aid has completely dried out, where countries are realigning, especially now, not in spite of COVID, but because of COVID, and redirecting supply chains to go more local. Africa has no choice, especially when the basic things we need for our survival, we can't continue to depend on others who have to keep the oxygen mask on their faces before they think of us. So I think there's a strong, there's a compelling reason for us to begin to look more within, and I'm very confident that those who haven't ratified yet will soon ratify. On the point about the benefits, I mean, how does private sector take advantage of this? Private sector, I must say that governments do not trade, and this is a continental free trade agreement. It is a private sector that trades, or it's companies that trade, not governments. So there's no reason why the companies or institutions or private sector should not take advantage of this. If it's looking at taking advantage of the huge 1.3 billion population market that we have, as well as also all the factors of production that raw materials and that originate from Africa, that all we need is to really add value. And it's not a situation where we don't have the minds. We just talked about Dr. Amina compiling all the indigenous plant resources of the continent, for example.
The pharmaceutical PR, yeah.
And these are raw materials that are producing a lot and adding to the GDP of other countries. The issue is not now having the know-how. We have the know-how to add value. The issue is not, so it's always basic things about also the rules, the intellectual property rules and things like that. How do we design those rules to play? And I think those are some of the things that the CFTA offers us. So what I think the private sector needs to do is to get itself educated about the benefits and also understand that the CFTA is about rights. It's about laws. It's not just an agreement. It's also about rights that we must hold our governments accountable to and ensure that when they go negotiating those rights, they are to our advantage, because you don't want private sector to be implementing agreements or be beneficiaries of agreements that they find inimical to their interests. We've seen agreements like the Open Sky, for example, that was signed many years ago, over 3 decades ago. And the companies that are supposed to be implementing or driving that are not even fully involved because they don't see its benefits to them. So we hope that we don't run into the same problem with the Continental Free Trade Agreement. And that's why we, as a multi-stakeholder organization, have been very, very keen on ensuring that the private sector doesn't just continue to sit on the sidelines and look at the AU and the member states as just being organizations that just formulate policy, and the AU not just looking at the private sector as just people who want to amass wealth and make profit. That we must get our skin in the game, get involved, and understand the issues so that we can know what their rights are and make sure that we hold ourselves. There's a lot of capacity in the private sector that we can bring to the public sector to ensure that this is a win-win, both for the private sector and the public sector. Thank you.
You know, what's interesting is that we have somebody from the private sector right now. For somebody like me who has been to Gambia, the fact that Gambia doesn't have a fully fledged laboratory to test its groundnuts so that, you know, you can check whether the aflatoxins in this batch of groundnuts are not going to prevent the groundnuts from being sent to Germany and being disposed of because of their levels. And of course, with the Gambia Chamber of Commerce, I mean, some of the things that you dealt with while you were chairman, Mohammed, some of the things that you dealt with, the fact that you have all these technical barriers, you've got business people taking some of your essence and requesting the Gambian government to support you. My question is, how do you deal with all these things with the AFCFTA and ECOWAS and all those things that you've had to deal with as a private sector dealing?
Well, Dennis, thank you. Those are very valid questions. But I always tell people that the challenge we have, we, the successful and big entrepreneurs, we can go around government, we can push and lobby. But what about the average small, medium-sized businesswoman between the Aflao-Lome border, between the Banjul-Dakar border? How would they benefit in this program when there's no unique or single currency that we can settle amongst each other? I'll talk about the Gambia challenge, and I'll tell you the 3 things I really like to see. And I'm glad to have 2 honorable excellencies here. Maybe they can help push the agenda or our agenda for the private sector. Gambia, we have a very challenging situation. And what I tell people, there's an economic population and political population. The economic population is 50 million. Gambia's granite should not be seen as Gambia's granite. Gambia, Senegal, Mali, they all produce granite. We should figure out a way whereby we should be able to bargain and sell our granites together. Our capacity as a country of 2 million compared to Senegal's capacity of 14 million and Mali's capacity of 16 million. If it is put together and we go and sell our granules to the Europeans or to the Chinese as a single block, we would be in a much stronger position than Gambia trying to sell 100,000 tons. Senegal's trying to sell 500,000 tons. And that's what I think might be the solution. We have tried to push our governments into that area. But I think most of these governments, with due respect to the 2 excellencies on board, always look at the next 5 years. How do I get re-elected? Rather than what happens in the next 50 years. How does my economy transform and have the required materials to transform that granite into oil and add more value to it? Regarding the AFCTA, I look at it in 3 dimensions: digital economy, tourism and travel, and agriculture. Today, it is much easier for a Gambian entrepreneur to go to Brazil and import sugar than to go to Dangote and import the sugar from Nigeria to Gambia. I mean, these are challenges that we need to figure out how to solve. Whether it's by sea or by road, how do we move goods from one part of the economy in Africa to the other without creating so much headache? For example, it would take me about 14 hours to travel to Abuja from Banjul. But if I want to go to Paris or London, I'll be there in 6 hours. How do we solve that? Tourism, I mean, I've been to Cape Verde. Is a wonderful place. I would love to go with my kids, but to go to Cape Verde from the Gambia, it will take us 3 days. But to go to Paris, we will be there in 6 hours. So how do we bring this as part of trade? Tourism is very important in trade. The digital economy is very important in trade in terms of settlement. And agriculture is key in trade in terms of sustaining our food and livelihood. Thank you.
What's interesting is that, Dr. Lopez, you are quite right when you talked about the different dimensions of the AFCFTA. But let me just ask, Dr. Remy, let me pose a very quick question. What do you think would be the most effective way to get Mohammed and his family to Mauritius to enjoy the beach in less than 12 hours? How can we do that under the circumstances and within the context of the AFCFTA?
It's to me?
Yes.
Yeah,
I know it's a very... So let me ask the question again, and I'm asking this question because Mohammed seems to be challenging leaders, suggesting that some of these things that we're talking about, some of the AFCFTA aspects, they are very, very high. How practical can we get things to be? So based on that, Mohammed, I'm now championing your children and family to go to Mauritius because it's very beautiful. How can we get his family there in a very short while within the context of the AFCFTA?
Thank you. Thank you again. I think the 3 words that came up when we've been discussing the AFCFTA is the movement of goods, of services, and of course of people. And there's no doubt, I think we all have to recognize that traveling across Africa is a headache. And unfortunately, there hasn't been many, there have been a few flagship airlines. Unfortunately, the biggest one is having a lot of challenges right now, South African Airways. But there's no doubt that if we are going to ensure the movement of people, first of all, we need to get the airline in order. But the second thing, which is of course also equally important, is visa access to all these countries. And it's unacceptable that even I have, with the Mauritian passport, you get to many places, and I get to the EU without any visa. I get to I can even get to Asia sometimes without any visa, but I go to Africa and I'm challenged with so many visas. So this is something that needs to be addressed. But one thing that he's also mentioned, I think is very true, with respect to agriculture, I'm sure we'll touch on this later on, I'll just mention this up front, is that Africa is home to about 60% of the world's arable land. And because this will touch on to something else that we will be discussing eventually later on, is the issue of infrastructure. And Africa home to 60%, and yet most of the agriculture on the continent is still rain-fed agriculture. We've missed the green revolution, and we still haven't invested into the infrastructure to ensure irrigation, and also look at the way we have been training our young people as well in this area. And the most important thing, I think, in Africa, when it comes to agriculture, is to modify and literally change the stereotype image that African agriculture has. And it has not been appealing to many people, to young people, to get into agriculture, because when I was younger, all I could see African agriculture was this woman with a baby on her back and tilling an arid, and now we know with climate change, you have even a drier soil. I mean, this is not agriculture as we know it, when there is permaculture, when there is so many protected agriculture, so many, and yet the AFDB has systematically said that we are sitting on a $1 trillion business, which is agriculture. And if we are to provide food security to our increasing, ballooning population, we're going to have to take this very, very seriously. Of course, we will also discuss our resources. You know, at some point, there almost was a food security issue in Ethiopia because the basic food item, teff, was being exported because it is gluten-free. Now, how do we promote agriculture with these high value crops and still ensure food security now in our region? And there's so many of these lesser known undervalued crop, and we are in West Africa, we know about the fonio. So all these come to a very central issue of planning and also building and investing in our infrastructure, but more importantly, engage in discussion, be it with the AU, be it with the other regional blocs, so that movement of people is made easier so that we can promote local internal tourism, if anything else.
Interestingly, Dr. Ramina, I have somebody called Jay Andraza who has just sent us a question. It's basically saying it's a privilege to be here, but he has a question on how can we as Africans manage our own natural resources, like in the Congo, it is a bed of minerals and things like that. Jay, instead of taking the question to Dr. Ramina, let me just put Dr. Lopez on the spot, because Dr. Lopez has written countless articles on resources, agriculture, and when he was at the Economic Commission for Africa, we published very many articles in this regard. Dr. Lopez, there has been a major question on agriculture, managing aspects on the AFCFTA. Technically speaking, if you had a magic wand, if you had all the power in the world, how would you, in the next 12 months, get the AFCFTA functioning to benefit our friend Mohammed, functioning to benefit our friend Dr. Redem, functioning to benefit Dr. Amina, and functioning to benefit a person like me who would like to really contribute to the continent?
Well, you know, to negotiate an agreement as complex as the CFTA, you need time. We are actually doing it pretty fast if you compare with historical experiences of agreements that were not as wide in number of countries as this one. For instance, European Union, it took them about 3 times more time to be where we are right now. But we still have a lot to do. We have a protocol on trades and goods that has been negotiated, but then we have a protocol on trades and services that is still ongoing. It's a very complex protocol to negotiate. We have a protocol on procedures and dispute settlement, which is very complex. We have issues relating to intellectual property to clarify. We have particularly rules of origin to clarify, which is the dimension that worries countries like Nigeria a lot. And I think we are going to enter next phase with discussions on investment and discussions on e-commerce. So this is a very complex architecture, and it is part of an even wider architecture, which is Agenda 2063, that has a certain number of flagship projects, of which the CFTA is one. But I must underline, one is actually the open skies policy, is this idea that we need to integrate air travel in Africa. It's one of the flagship projects. It's very important to mention that we have an agreement that has been signed a long time ago. Only 33 countries have so far actually put their names against it. It's not the totality of the continent. But I must say that Gambia has signed, Cape Verde has signed. So it is now really in the hands of the private sector to be able to actually make it happen, because the regulators have already completely created the conditions for an integrated market amongst these 33 that have signed, and Gambia and Cape Verde happen to be one. But I have to admit that airline industry is a very competitive industry, and we need to actually boost our carriers, which we know with COVID are going to suffer a lot. But we can see the glass half full, half empty. We can see, for instance, that Ethiopian Airlines is now one of the most profitable airlines in the world. It has extended its reach to 62 African cities, which is quite colossal. And this was not the case, just about 10 years ago. And on the other hand,
Dr. Lopez, just a quick question, Dr. Lopez. Do we need a Marshall Aid Plan for Africa? This is a question that just came in from Arnold Segawa. So while you were talking about that, I wanted to quickly bring it up to you.
Well, there is a lot of talk about the Marshall Plan. The last proponent of that was Angela Merkel during the G20 meeting hosted by Germany. I must say that the Marshall Plan idea, if it was really like the Marshall Plan, would be a good idea. The problem is that we use the expression, but not the content. The expression is that, it was a plan that helped reconstruct Europe after the Second World War. But it did because the United States of America went all the way up to 7% of their GDP in support to that plan. Now, we don't have anything near that for Africa being proposed. On the contrary, we talk about peanuts that are not even 0.00 something % of the GDP of the countries that are proposing it. So it's just it's a fake news, if you want. It's just the expression without the content. You know, it's like, you know, you have a fantastic marketing of a chocolate, but the chocolate is really terrible. So let's not have much, you know, capital lost in that type of discussion. But what I do think is important, you know, just to answer your preoccupation about natural resources, is that yes, Africa has 35 countries in the category that the United Nations consider highly commodity dependent, which means that at least 80% of their exports depend on commodities. This is terrible because we are subject to volatility. We don't control the prices of these commodities. We export them raw, which means that there is no value addition. We export them with the jobs, if you want. And this is what we need to change. But to change that, we need a different type of economic structure in our countries. And one of the characteristics that I'm sort of defender and try to push our leaders to adopt is how we do our industrialization. And one of the reasons we have not been very successful in industrialization is not the only one, but one of the reasons is because our markets were too fragmented and too small for industry to prosper. So that's why you only have real size industrial sector in countries that are large enough to have a national market. Otherwise, the smaller ones could not really afford to have an industrial sector, only counting on their small markets.
Out of interest, Dr. Lopez, what you have brought up almost helps me encapsulate 4 of the elements that I've noticed about this panel. 1, perception. We have to deal with the perception issues. 2, the AFCFTA might be a huge thing, might have different perspectives, but it's not the end-all, be-all. We have to move beyond that. 3, the private sector, yes, is supposed to be doing all these things. It is supposed to be doing much more than it is doing right now. But somehow, somewhere, like our friend Mohammed mentioned, the private sector needs to be supported by some sort of government effort. And then I'd like to go back and bring in Dr. Edem's point. Dr. Edem's point, I think, for me, is quite central to the overall discussion. These initiatives that we are engaging into, in terms of the AFCFTA, we really need to bring all parties to the table. From this perspective, and now I just want to quickly come to Mohammed. Mohammed, we were trying to answer some of these questions on your behalf. Where have we not answered your question? In other words, I know that you mentioned about big people. I know that you're a big entrepreneur. How can we address the small entrepreneurs? In other words, can some of these things address some of the challenges? Mohammed, over to you.
It was interesting that on, was it Deutsche Welle, the German TV, I saw this lady in Lome, I think Her Excellency Maimuna talked about wax, that the intellectual rights are owned by Europeans or Dutch brands. So she has designed her own wax, and she's going to China and bringing it and selling it into Lome. But the Hollander wax team seem to be fighting aggressively for her to be successful, to the point that she's selling most of this online to Africans in the diaspora. But what has the Togolese government done to support an industrial woman like that? I mean, there's nothing wrong to go to China if you have your own design, come up with your own concept. But I think what has been the case is these big multinationals from Europe or the neo-colonial economies are still holding us to a point that it's difficult for our politicians to see, how do I breed my own champion so that in 10, 20 years time, that champion would be a global brand in Africa. But I think both excellencies have answered my question. But I just wanted to say something. African politicians like to say that the private sector is the engine of growth. But I want to ask all of you in this panel and people listening, have you seen any engine function without lubricant? The governments are supposed to be the lubricants. We're not asking them anything. We're just telling them, make it easier for me to go to Nigeria and buy sugar from Dangote, bring it and sell it to Gambia. It is easier for Gambian importers to go to Brazil import sugar than buy sugar from Dangote.
Mohammed, let me now talk about the lubricant. Dr. Redem has been efficient at this lubrication under the Afro Champions aspect. Dr. Redem, how can we make sure that the engagement between government, between policymakers like Dr. Lopez, borrowing from some of the wisdom that Dr. Amina has talked about, how can we do this? In other words, where is this lubricant? And then I'll come back and talk about the fuel for the car when I speak to Dr. Amina. Over to you, Dr. Redem.
Well, I think we must start by first saying that the government should also not just keep switching on and off the engine, you know, because you turn on a car and then when governments change, another one comes, switches it off, and then looks for other business people and switches on their engine. And then when governments change again, they come and switch off the engine again. So that's one of the areas in which I'm hoping that the local capacity for businesses that have a desire to integrate, a desire to transform, and a desire to emerge globally can only be fueled, I mean, by some very strong support for government. We see it with the Huawei's in China. We see it with the Samsungs in Korea. We see it with what is happening even in America now, right? Some level of support that is being given to their tech companies to be able to give them capacity to be globally competitive. That's how you keep the engine on. And the lubricants are always going to be the policy environment that you create to ensure that this continues. You see, the private sector does not operate out of isolation. The private sector must get the capacity they need from governments creating the enabling environment for them to survive. And I'm hoping that with the CFTA now, the ability to have private sector companies, but not only private sector companies, there are also parastatals and government companies as well, whether it's in areas of insurance, whether it's in financial services. All of these can find themselves within an environment where they can compete, they can collaborate, and be able to emerge beyond their shores. Because until you have access to multiple markets, I mean, in the last 25 years, you just mentioned a few companies like Ethiopian Airlines, Dr. Carlos mentioned, that barely existed, 25, even though they existed, not with that level of prominence. We've seen many, many other companies emerge and grow and are breaking barriers to integration, language barriers, regional barriers, among others. So EcoBank barely existed, 25, 30 years ago, in 33 countries now. And these are just few examples, emerge out of a country like Togo. And so there's definitely capacity for growth. What we need is to be able to put all our hands on deck. And how Afro Champions has been assisting in that regard is making sure that we bring the champions, like you said, you know, where are the champions in our financial institutions? What lessons are there that they've learned that we can get others who are aspiring to grow into their value chains, you know, to be able to learn likewise? What are the industrial champions? What are the challenges they faced? How do they bring others within the value chain so that one big multinational could take an SME into all the 30 countries they're in? We're doing that currently with EcoBank, where we are developing, we've been helping with their FinTech Challenge, for example, where we bring startups into their operation, understand what exactly they're doing, what are their needs for cybersecurity, what are their needs for technology, what are their needs for payment solutions, etc., which is not the core business of that multinational, and enable them to understand and then go and build solutions that they can now integrate in all their 33 countries, among others. So those are the kind of examples we need. Mm-hmm. We tend to hit ourselves hard by always looking at all the reasons why things cannot work, the challenges and opportunities. But I think within these challenges also, we see a diversity of opportunities and solutions. There's so many amazing people doing things. I mean, recently when we launched our BOMA of creatives, for example, you look within the sector, and I know they're going to be talking about creatives tomorrow, but it's not only in the hard infrastructure or the traditional setups where there's capacity for growth. You look within the world, Africa is contributing to sports, Africa is contributing to art, Africa is contributing to music. We've got big Africans in the entertainment industry in the Hollywood industry, all turning, contributing to massive GDPs of those countries. But you don't see those trickling down to the value add from production to training to all the business services that grew out of this. So it's not just in the core production sectors, it's also in the services area. And remember again that most of these multinationals we see that are integrating the continent with their cross-border operations, most of them were in the service areas, the finance areas. The goods have, I mean, the production and industry has been more difficult because of the infrastructure, which we need to be able to move these goods. So what I will add to that is that we should also focus on certain strategic sectors that could be enablers. You know, most trade is happening. I mean, 90% of trade happens on maritime, but there's not a lot of investment in that area. That would be one of the quickest areas by which we could start moving goods whilst we're still building the rail and the roads. All we need is a runway. We have the champions like Ethiopian Airlines. We have a runway. We have champions like Askai. We have champions like EcoBank. We have maritime champions that exist. All we need is to bring them together and focus on few areas and ensure that governments, through what I call the coalition of the ready. I'm sure that everyone is willing, but how many of them are ready? Because there's no proof of concept, Dr. Lopez, of us being able to deploy anything continentally across the continent, beyond what private sector does, where they go to each country, set up, go to each country, deal with different regulators, deal with different standards organization, and then try to figure out how they can integrate. And we need to be able to bring government to hold their hand through either the REX or some of these Pan-African institutions to be able to help start deploying. So if it's 4 countries that are ready to start moving their standards so that you don't have to be filling the same forms anytime, phytosanitary forms, anytime you move from Zambia to Malawi and to do the same things again. If those 3-4 countries can come together and take a lead, let's do that. And that's for me where the champions, so it's not the champions in the private sector alone, it's in the champions in the public sector and bringing those champions together to start doing things that others can begin to fashion themselves out.
What's interesting is, Dr. Redem, I think you had a direct question for Dr. Lopez. And I'm just going to quickly jump into a Q&A session. And this is not to end the panel. We have another 40 minutes to go. And I just wanted to take advantage of as many things as possible. So let me start on a sweet spot. Dr. Ramina, Dr. Redem, I believe Mohammed as well, and I think Dr. Lopez almost hinted at the onus on government. You have sat at the helm of a government, but right now you are also a private sector player, and you're doing quite well in terms of the private sector entity of things. My question to you is, in a very short span, could you tell us, is it true that the government doesn't have the will, or is it that they're inundated by all sorts of requests and also challenged by resources? What is it? What is behind the curtain?
Thank you again. I think Edem has raised some very key issues, but it can be summed up, if I may be kind of ambitious to say, it can be summed up with 2 words. We need more and more of government. We need more and more of governance. And, you know, if we look at, because our ambition is just beyond the AFCFTA, is also to actually empower our young people. And our main challenge, I use the word challenge very carefully because it's going to be a challenge if we don't empower our young people. And this is where we will need more government, because if you look at the United States, if you look at the most innovative products that have been generated, starting from the internet, to all the research and development that have happened that led to fantastic goods that we consume, most of them have been, if not all of them, they have started initially with government funding. Biotech, you know, as I said, the internet and so many others. So we need government to be in that space to put in the investment. And this is again where we are weak. And I hope that somewhere along the line of the discussion of the AFCFTA, we will need that at least 1% injection into research and development on the continent. And if each country has come up with at least the 1%, we will of course be very, very far. Anyway, we are where we are, so we need that. And then government also need to create the enabling environment. If government is creating the enabling environment and act as a bridge between the public and the private sector and help develop the ecosystem, these young people with innovative ideas can start becoming entrepreneurs as opposed to job seekers. And this is something that we have to promote, because every year on the continent, we are welcoming something like 12 million graduates per year. And there's nowhere anybody at any scale can produce the jobs. And now with COVID, we are seeing something else. However, the COVID has shown us something very, very fundamental: how we can implement a much more digital era space. But then again, it also calls for government. And the other thing that we have to ensure, and we have to, really make sure that African Union implement this, is the governance issue. How do we actually, implement a system where we actually, call to order countries where they're doing a lot of corrupt practices? I know the AU has been very, very strong on, for example, the turning over of government. When there has been coup, they have been able to suspend, but go beyond that. So corruption issues, governance issues, and also we need to look at, I'll just go back a little bit. We are all saying that, there has been, we are bad players on the continent. But I consider the history of this continent to be, 60 years. Why 60 years? Because it stems from the decolonization, which has started about 60 years ago. So post-independent history for many African countries is about 60 years. So we're still in the building process, but we have to move very fast. We're going to have to start running before we can start walking. And, at the initial days after colonial, the era, we saw many generals at the helm of countries. Now we're seeing more technocrat, we are seeing more engineers, we are seeing more scientists, doctors, you name it. We are seeing more of these professionals coming on board. But the discussion we'll need to have with them is to keep on creating that space and keep on investing. Now, when it comes to Mauritius, we have been, people have been beaming and said we are talking about a Mauritian miracle. There has not been a Mauritian miracle. There has been a series of strategic decisions which have been taken, and it started immediately after independence. After independence, we started by giving social service free, healthcare free, and by 1976, we started giving education free. I mean, that was, of course, created a lot of furor in the country because people said we're going to go bankrupt. But we invested in the infrastructure, we invested in the people. So we need to invest in both infrastructures, infrastructure of the mine and also physical infrastructure. And then there has been a series of strategic decisions, because we started with a per capita income of $200 in 1969. And right now we are just under, I think, $10,000.
Yes, you are.
So how did we do this? We don't have any resources. People talk about resource curse for those countries that are resource rich. But this is again where government, with proper governance, we need to ensure that these resources work for the continent. This is where when we talk about transformation of our resources, value addition, so that these value additions spur innovation and spur job creation. So come back again to Mauritius, we started diversifying the economy. And we started diversifying the economy literally on the back of those people who got modicum education by 1976, 1980s. We started diversifying the financial sector. We started diversification into the IT, light industries, and all the rest of it. And right now we are at a crossroad because we need to go in, add new pillars to the economy. And I think right now we are grappling with COVID, with all the rest of it. We have just had a major oil spill in last month. So all these are challenges that we have to grapple with, but there has never been a Mauritian miracle per se. There has been a series of strategic decisions, but overarching with all this is the fact that we have elections every 5 years. The downside to that is that the vision is 5 years, but the upside is that we're going to have to keep on building our institutions. And this is something I always talk about in Africa. We need to build our institutions so that they become the repositories of so many things, including our culture, including our history. We need to keep on building that repository. We need to keep on building our institution, and we need to put at the helm of our institutions competence and talent. This is the only way that we can ensure that the best minds of this continent stay continent and don't go elsewhere. But we need to invest in them. We need to build the ecosystem so that we create a whole nation of entrepreneurs. But again, something we have to address very quickly, as you have rightly pointed out, Mohammed has said this, is how do we protect our intellectual property? We have seen, just give me one second before I end, is that we have seen how one major innovation in Kenya, the M-Pesa, how it has transformed the economy. We have seen they have been the pioneer of mobile money. But where is that innovation registered? It is not registered in Africa. It's registered in London. So this is where we need to build our institution. This is where we need to make them stronger so that when we protect something, it stays here. And this innovation can become the vehicle of growth and production of wealth, which will serve our people.
You know, what's interesting is to take away from what Dr. Amina says. And I think it's to borrow from what Mohammed, to borrow from what Dr. Lopez talked about, Dr. Redden. It's almost like saying there are no miracles to be had in Africa except really hard work. If I'm not mistaken, that is what I'm taking away from Dr. Amina. And talking about all these things of the hard work, I have so many questions for Dr. Lopez. Let me just try and summarize the question for you, Dr. Lopez. I have a question from Jay Andraza, I have a question from Jack Mahamba, but they're talking about industrialization. So if I was to ask you a question, Dr. Lopez, is there a chance, or is it possible, and also to remember something that Mohammed talked about, and something about the groundnuts in the region, is it possible to form some sort of coterie, an industrialized coterie, whereby we can have Africa's natural resources being sold as a certain platform that ensures that they are profitable? I ask this question because I remember that during your time at the ECA, you did have a certain infrastructure created on Africa's minerals. And I think that the last report that you did was on industrialization and urbanization. So from that perspective, I wanted to ask you, within the context of the AFCFTA and the context of this conversation. Thank you.
Well, you know, all regions have gone through waves of industrialization. So did Africa, but ours has stuck in about 10 to 11% of our GDP, which is very little compared to what other countries have obtained in similar moments of their economic history. And as a result, we don't generate enough jobs, formal jobs, to absorb our demographics, and particularly the fact that we have such a young population. So the reason why countries engage in industrialization is partly because that's the best response for the creation of modern jobs. But it was very much based on the principle that labor is very cheap when you start that curve, and therefore you take advantage of labor costs. And this today is no longer an option. It's no longer an option because you can replace parts of labor that are very cheap with automation, robotization, and new technologies. So unless you have a more qualified type of industrialization, you are going basically to be competing with the robots, and we don't want that. So how do we get out of this conundrum, since we are latecomers in terms of accelerating our industrialization? Which is basically three ways we can do it. The first is through agro-processing. And this has already been mentioned in the panel several times. Because we import about $53 billion worth of processed food or different types of food every year, it is an obvious option for us to trade amongst ourselves. We can protect those value chains more easily. They are not tech intensive. And therefore, you know, this is a very good entry point for our young people also to become more interested in agriculture, because what has happened with our agriculture is that it is subsistence related most of the times. And when it's commodity produced, it's basically to export raw without transformation. So that's one entry point. The second entry point is still to get parts of the industrial production for exports that are going to become too expensive to manufacture in China, because China's population is aging. Their social protection services are becoming more expensive. So they want to get rid of the low value type of manufacturing, the one that they cannot replace with robots competitively. And therefore, what we will have is basically textiles, plastics, toys, and stuff like that, being delocalized. It can be delocalized to Bangladesh, to Sri Lanka, or to countries in Africa, like it is happening, or Vietnam, or countries in Africa, like it is happening already with the examples of Ethiopia, the examples of Madagascar, the examples of Rwanda, and so forth. Then the third and most important avenue for us to industrialize quickly is actually to transform our commodities, because we are exporting them with the jobs. I'll give you just two examples to show how striking this story is. So you have a country like Zambia that is a large exporter of copper. Almost the totality of Zambia's copper go to China. But that's the real physical copper being extracted, transported to the ports in East Africa, and going to China. But on paper, the #1 trading partner of Zambia is Switzerland. It's because the intermediaries are the interlocutors of Zambia. They don't export directly to China, they export to Trafigura, to other traders that absorb most of the gain. So this is colossal loss because of the systemic problems that we have to regulate through the CFTA. Another example is Guinea. Guinea is a country that has the largest hydro potential in West Africa. And yet it is also the country with the largest deposits of bauxite in the world. Bauxite is very important for the new industries and new technologies because it is the metal that is used for electric cars and different things. So this richness of Guinea requires high intensity use of power, because if you want to transform bauxite into aluminium, you need a lot of power. So you know what happens? Most of this production goes all the way to Iceland to be melted, basically. And why? Because Iceland produces cheap geothermal energy. But so could Guinea with hydro. So you see, the problem that we have is the volatility of prices of our commodities is because we don't transform them locally. If Angola was to refine all its oil, it could sell all of it to its neighbors. No need to go further.
Very true.
But it doesn't transform, it even imports refined oil. Therefore, it has to export it to as far as China and the US. And with it, you don't create the possibilities of having a petrochemical industry, and so on and so forth. So we have problems like this over and over. So if we go and try to put in place the industrial policies that are going to support these three types of industrialization: agro-processing, light manufacturing, and commodity-based industrialization, Africa will be completely different. But of course, we have problems also with trade. That's why we need the CFTA. And just to give you the last example, for one day more in customs processing, papers, problems in the border, etc., you have the equivalent of 7 days of loss in terms of production. And you can translate it almost like most of our problems to export to our neighbors is because of the barriers, non-tariff barriers that we have with our logistics.
Interestingly, Mohammed, I am not too sure if Dr. Lopez has answered your question, but I think that you have a really good example from the European Union. I just want to hear your example, Mohammed, and then I would like to circle back to colleagues. But before you do that, Mohammed, panelists, if you have a question for your colleague on the panel, if you have a question for Dr. Lopez, for Dr. Amina, for Dr. Redem, anybody, please just go ahead and pose this question, because we are no longer, if you look at it from this perspective, we are a flat surface now, and it's a very good thing for us to engage with each other. All right, go ahead, Mohammed.
No, in fact, Dr. Lopez almost mentioned what I wanted to say in his the last part of his talk. I went to visit a factory in Austria that produce high value machines and used for the gambling industry. But then what happened is interesting. They have some of their components made in Czechoslovakia, some in Germany, and on a real time, the trucks arrive at the factory by 8:30 in the morning, plugs into the manufacturing, is assembled in Austria and exported. Do you think, Dr. Lopez, in our lifetime, we should be able to see it whereby different components come together in Africa or West Africa or East Africa that are going to go through customs without spending 6 days, 14 days, like the Gambia-Senegal border? Sometimes the trucks would spend 14 days there because the clearance have to be given from Dakar, not from the border post 300 kilometers away. Do you think in our lifetime this would really happen? That is the point I wanted to ask Dr. Lopez.
So let me just ask panelists quickly, starting with Dr. Redem, go to Dr. Romina, then finally come to Dr. Lopez. Let's answer Mohammed's question. In our lifetime, do you think this will ever happen? The fact that we can reduce the number of hours, the number of days, the 7 days. Then I will come back to productivity in the last part.
Absolutely. As long as there's the will, everything is possible.
Such Nigerian optimism. Let's hear from the Mauritian miracle. Let's hear it.
Well, we already reached this far. As Carlos has said, the EU had taken so many decades to reach an agreement. And we have already made so much progress with the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement. So I think there is a lot, and I think I will add further to what Mohammed has said. I would like to see the Rotterdam equivalent of cut flowers in Africa, because all the roses of Ethiopia and Kenya, they're getting shipped out to Rotterdam in the morning. So why can't we have the same thing here? Why can't we have, coming out of West Africa, the biggest chocolate factories? Why do we have to keep on exporting the raw material when two countries ensure the production of over 65% of the world cocoa? So these are some very good examples. And I think that with the way, if we are very serious about the AFCFTA, I do not see why this can't happen. And I think we have the will, but I think, as I keep saying, and I will keep on saying, like I sound like a broken record, we are going to have to keep on investing in our own people. We are going to have to understand that educating our kids is our responsibility, and we have to put our hands in our pockets. We can't expect this to come from donors all the time. They have given us, they have provided us with a catalyst, but the sustained investment must come from ourselves. So let us start investing. Let us start putting that 1 to 2%. And if you take the example of South Korea, this was also a very, very good example, because when South Korea came out of the South Korean War in 1953, I think, the GDP, the per capita income, was about the equivalent to an African country at the time. And now it's a giant. How did it become like this? Again, 50 years of post-independence history, they started investing in the human capital. Why can't we have that? Again, come back to governance, come back again to the will to build our institutions, because all the rest, all the ingredient to make that beautiful cake is here on the continent, but we need to drive it. We need to be serious in terms of our purpose, and we need to make sure it happens.
Colleagues, what's interesting is that I have a panelist going to join us in a few seconds. Samba is one of those who has invested significantly. But in the last 15 minutes of this conversation, Dr. Lopez, I know very many questions have been cast upon you, because as I see, many people have read questions from the ECA. Many people understand this very important role that you're undertaking. So let me try and encapsulate many of these questions and ask you a question that is heart and dear to my soul, and you will also be part of the next panel. How can we get people like the European Union, the United States, all these entities, how can we get them investing in the AFCFTA, knowing very well that it's going to generate dividends? From that perspective, is there a chance that we can connect the economic aspects of the AFCFTA, the economic aspects of the AFCFTA, the intellectual aspects of the AFCFTA, knowing very well that the AFCFTA itself is services, goods, airspace, and all that jazz? The question is, what wherewithal do we have to bring more partners in so that we can actually invest into the overall process? After all, we have COVID-19 that has taken away some of the liquidity.
Well, I think it's a no-brainer to say that if you have a large market in Africa that is really integrated, meaning that the issues that we are discussing, like non-tariff barriers, spending days, weeks in the border posts, and having a cost of a container from Kigali to Mombasa 3 times the cost of a container from Mombasa to China resolved. We are going to be able to really be very attractive. And the moment we start moving in the right direction, and we have only done baby steps so far, but the moment we start moving in the right direction, we immediately get attention. There is a lot of attention already in Africa and the potential that it offers with its CFTA. But I think what is the danger is that people may see the CFTA as a great opportunity for them to do business, but Africans themselves not taking advantage of that same opportunity. If we don't put in place our regional chains, our regional value chains, we are not going to be the main beneficiaries of our own free trade area. Because our own free trade area is not to just export to the outside world, is also to promote intra-Africa integration. So when you look into the figures that come from the different databases, what you see is that you have, the largest economies are now the ones that export the most to other neighbors. South Africa is number 1, Nigeria is number 2, Egypt is number 3. So it's almost like the same 3 at the top when it comes to size of GDP. So we may think that they are the ones that have the biggest advantage in actually adhering to the free trade area and taking advantage of the free trade area because they already have an infrastructure that is in place. But I think all the projections show that most of what is exported to other African countries on the intra-Africa trade is actually manufactured goods and services. It's not commodities. So commodities is what we send elsewhere. We send a bit to the neighbors, but not much. It's less than 20%. The rest is really things that are a bit more valuable. So which means that the small countries only need to specialize in one particular value chain. Let's say one country invests a lot on pharma. It can be a pharma producer for all its neighbors. That's why the CFTA becomes a big opportunity for the small ones, because the big ones are in different value chains. But the small ones will have to be much more economical and focus on a few, if not on one, depending on the size of the country, to actually make a good bet on what the CFTA offers as an opportunity. And some can be actually on services area. Togo has been mentioned here. Togo has now the best and the largest container port in West Africa. This is a small country, but it has a port that is more efficient and larger and uses transshipment and is the most secure according to Lloyd's, the insurance, reference point for all of that region. It's not Nigeria, that is the largest economy. It's not Ghana, which is the second largest. It's not Ivory Coast, which is the third largest. No, it's Togo, because they specialize and made a point of having a very efficient port. You can say the same story more or less for Djibouti in East Africa, again, on services and logistics. So small countries stand a huge chance of profiting from the continental free trade area if they actually are economical and very focused on the way they actually apply their policies.
What's very interesting about our entire conversation is that although we are speaking to each other as panelists, our conversation is being broadcast around the world, and many people are providing their insights, and they want to basically say thank you very much for your opinion, Dr. Amina, Dr. Lopez, Dr. Redem, Mr. Mohammed, and I'm going to bring in Mr. Samba very soon, but I'd like to just come back to Dr. Amina. You started us off on this very good trajectory. I have a question. If you were to summarize a message to the world right now in 30 seconds, what would that message be? Not about the AFCFTA, but the essence of COVID-19 and what that has made and meant to the continent in terms of trade and investment.
If I put it within the context of the COVID, I think the COVID has shown us something very, very significant in terms of our preparedness to face up to a pandemic. And this brings back again the issue of investment. And I think we have not invested enough in primary healthcare. And I think the issue will come up with another sector which will be impacted and which will need to make an impact on is the sector of education. The education I received when I was a child is no longer relevant to my children and will be even less relevant to my grandchildren. So how do we educate our kids with quality, relevant education so that we, and even for young people and older people who want to come back again into the job space, is how we can make them unlearn so as to make them relearn things. And this is something which we'll have to privilege, and we'll have to privilege the sciences, and we have to make sure that girls also come on board, women, because women, I think the 80% of the job in I think on the continent, of course, Carlos can correct me if I'm wrong, it is in the informal sector. And here we have a high percentage of these jobs which are taken up by women. So we'll need to train them. And I think investment will be in the order of the day for all of these sectors. And this is again what we call on governments.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amina. Dr. Redem, I'm going to jump to you in a second. And the reason I have to jump to you is that you have technically invested in STEM. You have technically invested in relationships between private sector and government. From your perspective, what message should we take out from this session? And of course, not just this session, but for the sessions going forward on the state of Africa vis-a-vis the AFCFTA and COVID-19.
The message I will, the takeaway for me would be that we should look at the brighter side of things. If there was anything that has jolted us and pushed us to look within and absorb our collective strength, it's with COVID. We should take COVID as, we should think of how to transform COVID from a crisis to an opportunity, to address a lot of the things that we know were important, but we've always put on the back burner simply because we could look for other places or other people to support us. I think now the challenge is two things happening at the same time. One, the desire to implement this agreement, and now a challenge that COVID presents. And we should look at this, combine those two reasons, and know that we also have a burgeoning youth population that the continent is producing. And it was Dr. Lopez that talked about the aging populations of other continents. I think the continent that has the most youthful population has no reason to not be the center for the freshest ideas that will transform the world and make this become the place where others would come and incubate their greatest ideas. And so I see a lot of hope if we can get some immediate results. I think we shouldn't be looking at too many things. I'm a strong believer of God's law, which is that any complex thing must have to start first as a very simple thing that works very well. And if we can get one or two things working very well, as far as this agreement is concerned, it's just a matter of beginning to build on top of it. Thank you.
So I'm very lucky that I have Mr. Samba Batili. I know that it's coming at the very end of the overall discussion, but Mr. Samba Batili is the founder of the African Development Solutions. He's a co-founder of Acorn Lighting in Africa, the CEO of Selectra International. I don't know if you people have seen some of these wonderful things that have been developed in Senegal, and I think that he is part of these new satellite cities, basically the new Wakanda. Mr. Samba, I have to jump in very quickly to ask you, how do you see the state of business, the state of Africa, the state of Africa right now? How can we attract more investment? How can we attract more relationships, even if we have COVID playing a very dirty role in the region? Over to you.
I'm good. Thank you very much. I'm talking to you from Cape Verde, where I'm now on vacation with my family. So CFTA is the solution because CFTA is the African market of 1.3 billion, because you cannot talk about trade, business without market. I think it's time for Africans to realize that. And this pandemic show us that. If you look at when the pandemic occurs, we understand that trade is key because everything was blocked. Look at all those equipment, all those importation, fintech change, fintech time. I give you an example. I'm working on the World Bank project in Niger, in water. So we pay the supplier. It took us 4 months to get our supply because the factory stopped, everything stopped. So this is an opportunity for Africa. And that's what we've been talking about for so long at Afro Champion. We need to rely on our own force. Look at the simple mask manufacturing. Was obliged to import that from China. And that's what we did at ADS. We invest quickly in a factory to produce masks in Senegal. These are not rocket science. There's a lot of light industry that African could do. And when I understand that even dental toothpick people are import from China, Africans should revise their copy. And CFTA give an opportunity to do that, to create that African market. So the solution is that private sector need to come together with public sector. AU can play a role. We need to find in every country what is the competitive advantage of this country. So we bring together business people, public sector to make that happen. Give you an example. Rice importation. Do you know that only on approach cost, you will pay more than $120 just on the logistic of rice? Give you an example, a country like Mali, where I'm from, the transport of rice is $60 for the ship, $30 for the post-port logistic stuff, $80 if you are a landlocked country like Mali, $80 to transport it from Dakar to Bamako. Can you imagine if we could put a good system so this money could go to our farmers? And this is job also. This is a lot of job. The sub-region of Africa import 5 million tons of rice. The ton of rice price today is like almost $400. So this pandemic show us that African need now to make effective this CFTA. So then we need to come together, private sector and public sector, to focus on each country competitive advantage to make sure we're doing the right project and the right mutualization in order to move forward. Look at
Samba, I just have a quick question for you, Mr. Samba. Out of interest, you talked about getting goods from Dakar to Mali. What about using River Gambia? Is this the sort of right project that you're talking about to basically get goods from the Atlantic Ocean, River Gambia, all the way to Timbuktu, and then getting the goods to Mali? From that perspective, basically regional integration. Is that the sort of project you're talking about?
I heard about it. It's I don't know if there is study because It's all about feasibility, cost efficiency. For your information, I invest lately in a ship that will do African port. It will go from Cape Verde to Nigeria. Cape Verde to Nigeria. So you see, most of the time, when you're shipping a container from Dakar to Abidjan, most of those containers could go to Amsterdam or Antwerp and go back to Abidjan. So this is also a problem for the industrialization. You have a lot of good manufacturing in Nigeria or Ivory Coast that cannot be competitive because of the logistics. It will be cheaper to bring good from Amsterdam to Dakar rather than Abidjan to Dakar. So these are things that we need to tackle in the CFTA. So that can only happen with a good collaboration between private sector and the public sector to make sure that we're putting those things together, what the government can do in terms of taxation, in terms of legislation, to make that market strong enough so private sector can invest, investor from the world could invest, because it's all about opportunity.
Out of interest, Mr. Samba, I want to ask Dr. Lopez. Dr. Lopez, Mr. Samba's brought up a very important aspect, which is the infrastructure elements of getting the containers that have to come to Africa, having to go to Europe first. Is there something that Mr. Samba could invest in right now to prevent that from happening, apart from, of course, creating our own infrastructure, which could be very expensive?
Well, you know, people will be completely amazed with just this fact that I will share with you. Which African country has the largest shipping industry, or no, rather, which African country has the largest shipping company? Ethiopia, a landlocked country that doesn't even have a port. Why? Because they realize that in order for them to become an exporting country, they needed to actually control some of the routes that are important for them. So they have docked in Djibouti the largest shipping company infrastructure of any African country. This is appalling. We don't invest on logistics. And what we know today is that, in fact, if you look into the composition of value of products that are exported, the first most valued part is actually the value of intellectual property. All that we consider like soft, like the marketing, like the design, like the elements that are going to control quality and so on and so forth. Then the second most important value composition is logistics. So if we really don't tackle the parts of the logistical challenges that we have right now in the continent, we are going to continue to suffer despite having a CFTA. The CFTA can only be really used in its entirety if we really tackle non-tariff barriers, which logistics and difficulties of logistics is the most important.
I want to quickly bring in Mohammed. Mohammed, you had Mr. Samba talk about some of these things that he's investing in, some of these elements that he's investing in. I asked that question on Gambia intentionally because I wanted to see if this is the kind of solution that you'd be talking about. If you were to speak to people like major investors, like Mr. Samba Batili, if you were to speak to major investors, major thought leaders like Dr. Lopez and Dr. Ramina, what would you say to them? Like Mr. Batili is back on the line. What would you say to him to basically invest in the overall system?
Hello?
Sorry, Mr. Samba, I'm asking a question to Mohammed to ask you to respond to you. So Mohammed, please speak to Mr. Samba. Did we lose Mohammed? I think we did. Let me just quickly come back to you, Mr. Samba. Mr. Mohammed has been talking about some of the issues that Gambia has. Mr. Mohammed, are you back on us? I wanted to ask you if you could speak directly to Mr. Samba.
Well, I think Mr. Bachili has a very interesting proposition because somebody mentioned about EcoBank in 33 countries. But we have to be mindful that EcoBank was started by the West African Chamber of Commerce. The West African Chamber of Commerce have tried to go into shipping and logistics to make it easier for movement of goods across the West African ports. And I think Mr. Bachili, what he mentioned is very important. But I think what we need to bear in mind also, West Africa needs to come together and have a single shipping liner that might connect to the rest of other African countries. Well, Gambia is too small to have a shipping line. Sierra Leone is too small to have a shipping line. Nigeria maybe, but it's too complicated. There are more private planes in Nigeria than planes in probably the rest of Africa. So I think Mr. Bacheli's initiative is very great. And I think the West African Chamber of Commerce has been trying to create a shipping line based out of Nigeria. But I think they still have issues in terms of getting countries or ports to sign off in certain, what do they call, legislation that would allow them to be able to move from one country to the other. We had the same experience. I went to Lagos, signed a contract with Dangote to import Dangote sugar from Lagos, Apapa port, into the Gambia. It almost bankrupted us because it took 6 months for the containers to arrive in the Gambia. Whilst when you import sugar from Brazil, it takes 10 days to Gambia, 7 days to Dakar. So I think this is something that governments really need to sit down. And I have told several people, I remember the AFDB meeting in Rwanda. I told His Excellency President Obasanjo, I said, what we need is for the African governments to understand the challenges small, medium-sized businesses face. Most of the people who make the decisions are traveling business class, first class, or on a private plane. They have a diplomatic passport. They have a protocol officer who takes care of all of their things. So they have no idea what entrepreneurs like Bacheli, myself, and thousands of others down the line, what we face trying to move goods from one part of Africa to the other. Unless and until we bring that on the forefront, we cannot have an effective ACFTA.
So from that perspective, Mr. Batili, just to talk about it from connectivity and digitization, what would you like to summarize in this entire conversation? How would you talk about moving things forward? Because you have resources, you have ideas, and most importantly, you have friends that can help with the process.
Okay, what Mohammed said about Chamber of Commerce, we already start talking with them. And this comes from an opportunity that I have with a European shipbuilder where we mobilize 40 million euro to start with. It's already get approved, and the first ship is already built. The whole idea was to launch it during the effectiveness of CFTA that was planned, I think, in July, and now postponed. So right now, I put a team of consultants that are working to make sure what type of good are manufactured in the ECOWAS region that could be competitive if we have a good logistics system to move it across the continent, across the region. So we are open to discuss with any business people, any industrial people to make that happen. The funding is in place, and it is the first of its kind type of ship forwarder. This ship is built by Damen. It's called a combi freighter. So you can have Roro, you can have container, you can have, in French, what we call vrac. So it can do different port, different type of cargo. That is what is needed in Africa. They only build 2 in the world. One is delivered to China, and the first one will be delivered to Africa. That's the ship, the first ship we're gonna receive. So Logistic is one thing. Legislation will be also key. We need to have the different facilitation in the different ports and bring together Chamber of Commerce, industries to make sure that's happened. That takes me to the second thing that is very important. One thing we need to know in Africa, we need to change our mentality. It's all about mentality. Because this market that we want to build can only happen if we change our software. That's, for an example, we need to know that in order to bring a stronger Africa, we need to consume the product we have here. I give you an example, just a simple cloth. We need to wear our own cloth. This is a $100 and something billion market, just in confection. I'm not talking about the other value chain up to the cotton yarn. So this is mentality. We don't need to be PhD in economic to understand if we all wear local cloth 5 times in a week from Monday to Friday, we're creating 50 million jobs for Africa. We are 1.3 billion Africans. Just confection. It will create jobs to the designer, confection people, and all the ecosystem of the fashion. So this is one thing. Another thing that we need to realize is that we need to send our kids to school in Africa. Look at all the people who have the money. All the children are in the US, in Europe, while we could send them into South Africa and Morocco. We need to specialize each African country. And Mr. Lopez, who is a professor, I think he can play a big role into that. So let's identify each African country with the competitive advantage in terms of school. So we can send our children there. We don't need to pay a lot of money for their apartments and cost of living. And then at least this money could remain in Africa. And then they will have the culture. Because sometimes when you go out, you come with a different mentality. Maybe it's not that you come with not a different agenda that is not African agenda. That's second. Third, we're talking about tourism, one of the biggest industry. I'm here now in Cape Verde with my family. And COVID shows us, today even if I want to go to France, I cannot. Because people who have visa cannot go to France today. So this is another opportunity. The ex-president, Mr. Fakim, Mauritius have nice beaches. So we need to make sure we build that market, because if we go to school in Africa, we go to hospital in Africa, we buy African product, then we will multiply the GDP of Africa. We don't need nobody to come and teach us that. This is a simple fact. Why cannot they do it? We can do it. Everybody have to make the example. That's the only way we create job, we create market. When there is a market, funding will come. Because we say it's not bankable, because there is not a market. Tomorrow, if there is a market, everybody will jump in. Money will flow, because the market is there. So it's like chicken and eggs. So we say, oh, no, there is not this, there is no electricity, there is no, because there is no, let's create the market first. Once we create that market, we will have a flow of FDI, we'll have even mobilization of the African funding. There's a lot of money in Africa, but it's misused. So that's the problem.
Mr. Samba, for me, it is such a pleasure to finally hear your advocacy and your spirit. What's very interesting is that Dr. Amina talked about almost the same things at the beginning. Dr. Lopez has talked about these very same things. My good friend Mohammed has talked about them. Dr. Edem has talked about these very same things. What I'm really happy about is that for this panel that has been talking for just over 1 hour and 45 minutes, we have almost come down to the same thing. The state of Africa is in a great potential because of COVID. It will be up to us to take advantage of the current status quo, or not the status quo, the current morass that we have been landed into. Up to us to take it to the next level. I just wanted to say, I know very well many of you have spoken. I don't want to get you to repeat, and I don't want to summarize things. I've also been able to take questions, and I've also been able to summarize questions. Luckily for us, many of the questions have been support, agreement. Elizabeth Makari just said Mr. Samba, I agree with you. We need to support each other. But one thing that is killing us is selfishness and corruption. I know that my good friend Edem talked about these things. I know Mohammed talked about these things. My only hope is that people will listen to this conversation after we record it. And I just wanted to say thank you so much, panelists, for doing this. And I'm going to end on this note. Francis Arthur says, as a young African, I'm inspired not to give up. At least some people are thinking right. What we need now is action, action, action. Panelists, thank you so much. Dr. Lopez, Mr. Batili, Dr. Redem, Mr. Mohammed, Dr. Amina, Your Excellency, it was such a pleasure to serve as your panelist. I mean, your moderator today. I couldn't have asked for a better panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dennis. It was a pleasure, and we're hopeful.
Thank you.
It will work. It will work. It will work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you very much, Mr. Samba. Thank you very much, Dr. Amina. Thank you very much, Dr. Lopez.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think the expression is "go the mass" has ended.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Thank you so much to our distinguished panelists. It's been such an exciting conversation. And I think, like Dennis said, we've come to an understanding that we have to change the mentality in order to achieve a common goal. It's been so enlightening. Thank you so much for the insights, Her Excellency Amina, Dr. Carlos Lopez, Dr. Edem, Mr. Samba Batili, and Dr. Dennis Matanda, and all the attendees that have joined in on this first session. Thanks a lot for joining us. So we now move on to the second session, but in the meantime, we will leave you with a promo video as we get the next panelists for investments, seizing opportunities post the pandemic in terms of investments and trade, and seeing what Africa can do and still attract FDIs regardless of the uncertainty. In the meantime, we'll play a video as we get panelists to join in.